The way we're set up, I can't see the Zoom chat very well, for what it's worth. We can kind of see it, but we have to fiddle around. We're on an iPad Zoom. We've got a laptop in front of us.
Thank you.
This is a tricky thing for 60 seconds. I'm passionate about masking, but I feel like I'm over passionate because it's hard to talk about it, and so I don't like talking about it. I am also super interested in the process of SenseDoing. I don't have a starting intuition on a topic. It just drives me crazy to think about it. And you guys know pretty much experience the experience I've got. The only weird thing about my opinion about masking is that I started doing COVID information really early, like in March or something like that, 2020. And I was parroting the party line, which was, please don't wear a good mask because we have to save the PPE for healthcare workers. So now, obviously, I've changed. And then the other odd thing is we say masks, but we always mean respirators, and that confuses people. Maybe you want to go next.
Peter said you're doing this thing and you were going to be, one of the topics you're going to do is masking. And did I have an opinion? It's like, yes, I do. So it's not that I want people to go around wearing respirators for the rest of their lives. I think there's a reason, like if you asked me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been like, yeah, I'm going to go masking all the time. But it's because there's this thing, SARS-CoV-2, that, so that's why we're discussing masking. There's this thing. But today is just about masking. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And a lot of thing that I've noticed is people said that someone works in 2 healthcare places, and in one of them, they require masks. People wear respirators, no problem. The other one, they don't require it, and so they don't wear it. And I think there's a lot of, if there should be, people are following the leader, people are following what they're told. And I think right now everybody's tired of it, politicians to get elected. I think they've discovered that you can't talk about COVID masking anymore because they'll lose you votes. And so I think we're going down the wrong path.
What do you think about sense making? It's another part of that.
Sense making?
Yeah.
Oh.
So Joanne had never heard of the term sense making, and she didn't find that the concept of sense making or sense doing makes a lot of sense, because people
given that the words are there, but still, I get it.
People don't care. So I said, well, why would they engage us to help them do sense making? And I gave the example of, well, a company might want to know what to do, in the face of a pandemic. They might want to know what their employees want. They want to listen to their scientists, whatever. She's like, Pete, people just, the management at that company is not going to listen to you, sense maker people. They're going to listen to a PR firm. I don't know why you guys are wasting your time doing sense making, because nobody cares. Everybody's got a better way of figuring out what they're going to do in life.
It's not only nobody cares, it's like the normal. So many times I've heard people say, but we don't wear masks anymore, but it's not necessary anymore. Like we don't have to test anymore if you have it. You don't have to, isolate yourself. It's people are doing what it's
what everybody knows is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So sense making doesn't make a lot of sense to you. For masks or
I don't think it's working for this. I don't think sense making works for this. It doesn't work for a lot of stuff.
And how's your opinion about masking changed?
The more I read about, once again, it's not that I'm pro masking, I'm pro not getting COVID. So the more I read about COVID, the more important I realize it is to even how we were with relatives this Christmas compared to last Christmas. We thought, like we just this year didn't take it off for eating, and we took our food outside and ate outside to take our mask off. And people thought it was weird because the year before we were eating in front of them. But
it's gotten a little bit more.
But it's, once again, it's not because I'm so excited about masks. It's because I'm learning more and more of all the horrible things that COVID could do to your body, not just when you get it, but for months and years after.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks. Who'd like to go next? Joel,
I could go. Let's see, passionate about this topic. Not particularly, I guess, passionate about the topic. I think it's an interesting one for sure. But more interested in the SenseDoing. I'm very interested in like organizing information relevant to problems and solving them and making decisions. So I think that's where my interest ties in with SenseDoing. Starting intuition on the topic, wearing masks can help prevent the spread of COVID. That's my intuition. That's all I got. And prior knowledge on the topic, not much, I guess, just like public, whatever the base common knowledge is about COVID and masking. Haven't done too much research. And has my opinion on masking changed? Not much, I guess. I don't know, feel like it's been pretty consistent, I guess. Masking is helpful. I guess like as COVID became like bigger, and then like now I guess it definitely seems like people are generally less like gung-ho maybe about masking, commonly at least. So I feel like I've kind of followed the path of the common person, where it's like in dense areas I still wear a mask, but not in not dense areas. So, and when I say mask, I think I mean cloth mask. So that's all I got, I think.
thanks. That's great. Who'd like to go next?
I can dive in.
Please.
So my main interest is in SenseDoing in general, kind of like Joel. I'm so this is an interesting topic, I think, to practice with. I develop tools that help people make group decisions and influence each other. So I might be interested at some point to talk about how Joanne was saying sense making doesn't work. I think part of that is how it's done and how it's implemented. So and the people that kind of care would be the people that, you know, who have family members arguing about it. I think it'd be helpful to have some tools to engage in that conversation more effectively. So that's the type of thing I'm working on. Tools to fight misinformation in this and other areas. So yeah, as far as masks, I was wearing them. You know, it's interesting. I'd like something more specific about when and where is it effective. Like I do see people outdoors, you know, and I'm in a huge wilderness preserve, which of course they could just have allergies or other things going on. So it may not be related to COVID. So it'd be interesting to kind of, you know, get a little bit more guidance on when to do it. And then I'm also concerned about like if this pandemic subsides and then future pandemics, when do we decide when that we suggest and require? So for me, it's mostly kind of planning for the future. But of course, if people are endangering themselves and us as a society by not wearing them now, I'd like to have some tools in my belt to help them, to help share that information effectively. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I've been wearing respirators for a while, like Pete talked about, and I probably wouldn't go back to fabric unless, of course, there was a shortage of some sort of respirator. Oh, and I'd love to design a better one, one where you can see out of it and it has some sort of airflow. But I'm never gonna have time to do that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Thanks, Bentley. I think I'll jump in next just because I think my opinions on this stuff are pretty close to where you are. And I can follow on. So I'm deeply passionate about sense making and sense doing. I may have a more expansive sense of what I mean by it, Joanne, than you do. Because for me, it's like, hey, if we can leave behind really easy to absorb and implement best practices, a term I hate, about something like masking, then an organization making a decision about it can go, oh, these are great resources. Let's just follow this until we go. And that could outweigh the extremely powerful forces of disinformation and public relations and everything else, which I'm happy to accept, darken our skies every day. So my hope is that clarity can actually sort of win that battle, and that utility or accessibility and then utility of the resources as the byproduct of sense making, sense doing. Partly why we're calling this sense doing. It's not just, we don't just want to sort of talk about these things. We'd like there to be some artifacts or end products that others could use and benefit from in those ways. And then for me, a really big piece of this is sense making and sense doing around group psychology, mandates versus encouragement. Like to me, it's not just about the science and the physics of particles and aerosols and whatever. It's really about what the hell can you say that'll cause people to, en masse, just go get masks and put them on, the hell damn it, because it makes so much sense and nobody told me I had to, right? So that the psychology of this process matters as much to me as the science of the process. In particular, because come next pandemic, if everybody got exhausted and hated the process and hated the mandates the first time, they will certainly not comply the next time. And so I think that like increased compliance over time is a goal of what I'm looking at here as well. The moment I heard the CDC say we don't really need masks, I was like, this is just bullshit. My bullshit detector went off and I was like, wow, CDC has just lost all credibility with me. And I was like, hey, we don't know exactly what this is. It appears to be very lethal and very and really dangerous and very contagious. And we don't know the mechanism of contagion yet. So people were washing their packages from from Amazon and letting things sit. And we didn't know fomites, aerosol, and we didn't know the difference, at least I didn't, between droplets and aerosols. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on. I remember loving a video where a guy had grade schoolers put goop on, one grade schooler put goop on his hands, and then go into a class and then use UV to photograph the classroom at the end of a couple hours. And it's like, oh my God, if it's fomites, we're dead, because that little goop was everywhere. Everybody had touched it in the class. So that was really cool. But my starting intuition was we need to try a lot of stuff and then experiment our way toward getting rid of the things that aren't necessary because they're overkill, because we've discovered that that's not the method of transmission, for example, or the method of action. I was thrilled when vaccines came out, because before that I was acting like Matt Damon on Mars in The Martian. When I went outside, I was like, anything could kill me. This thing seems to be very lethal. I just don't know like what might happen. But I was getting to the point where I was internalizing a phobia of touching and being close and all that, and that felt horrible. So at this point, I'm probably suffering some pandemic fatigue, where I'm not masking very much. I caught COVID when I was in Barcelona with my wife, probably in a restaurant, probably a bad idea. I have had every vaccine and booster kind of as soon as I qualified for it. So I felt like I was mitigating risk that way. But I know that there's a roll of the dice risk for long COVID that I've been so far fortunate to have no symptoms of whatsoever. I do feel like having gone through it and not having long COVID symptoms might actually make me more resistant, or might beef up my system more than merely having had the vaccines and not having caught it, which is maybe a wrong approach to have. I have no technical experience. I'm an avid reader, so like others in this group, I've been absorbing what I can and avidly. Joanne, when you pass word to Pete and he passes word to us or whatever, I'm like, ooh. And then I garden that into my sense-making apparatus, this external brain. And then my opinion about masking has changed, I think, several times. At the beginning, I was like, oh my God, this is really important. But I thought the cloth masks were sort of like, okay. My nuanced understanding of masking and face covering only increased recently when people's like, yeah, no, masking might be the wrong word to use in this little quest here. And I was like, ah, crap. And so I have a heightened awareness of that, and we have not gone out and purchased higher level, higher grade filters of any kind or respirators as a result, which is maybe dumb. I always wondered, like, poorly fitting face gear, et cetera, bearded men, the whole thing, like, that's just like not going to work very well. Never mind bandanas or other kinds of strange things. And so one last thing, sorry for all the detail and going so long. Early on in pandemic masking policies, I was wondering why we weren't asked to be just really damn sensible about it. And if you are outdoors walking around in your bubble, no need to mask. Outdoors, as far as I was concerned, was completely cool. And if you're walking far away from everybody, what a relief. You don't have to mask, go crazy, like walk around all over the place. The moment you come into proximity with other humans, mask up. And that way it's masks up, masks down, but not masks all the time and frowning at people who are outdoors in the frickin' park, enjoying the fresh air. I don't think there was any reason to have a mask on in that kind of setting. And in fact, making people have masks on in those settings made them less willing to have masks on when it really mattered. This is all back to the psychology of masking. So I've gone through stages like that where I was like, God, that was stupid, and I hate this policy, and so forth. And then I think I have a strong appreciation for, if a naive understanding of, cross-cultural attitudes towards masking, in particular in countries like Japan, where pre-pandemic masking on public transportation was completely normal and natural. When the pandemic showed up, Japan did not impose a lot of things, but everybody masked up because it's like, pandemic, okay, we know what to do. And the comparison of different countries' outcomes is interesting, but really, really tricky. At this point, even trickier because China and the sudden drop of policy and all that. Anyway, long things. Who would like to go next?
Go real quick. My interest is mainly in SenseDoing. I'm not particularly passionate about masking, but I think it's the perfect topic where you could really see how misinformation impacted how people thought about masking. For myself, it's very clear to me how I'm even affected by how different people are viewing masking. What else did I want to add? I can tell you that I'm more comfortable around people that do mask, even if they're just using cloth masks. It tells me that they're probably keeping more of a distance, and maybe these things are not true, but I feel more comfortable. And just on a funny note, I think it's funny, as far as vaccines go, I remember back with all the misinformation when the vaccine first came out, and I was like, now I'm getting kind of skeptical about it. What made me really decide, yes, I want to run out and get this vaccine, is when I found out from a friend of mine who worked with seniors that they were getting bribed to get to the head of the line. As soon as I knew that rich people were paying to get to the head of the line, I was like, this vaccine's for me.
That's very funny. It's a little bit like the history of potatoes. Nobody could get Europeans to eat potatoes, but they're very nutritious. So the King of France basically planted a plot in his gardens, put guards on the plot, and then told the guards to turn away so that people could steal the spuds. Who's next?
I'll pipe up. Jerry, I'll sign on to a fair amount of what you said. Just the basics in terms of the early opinion. And I remember, I specifically remember the fact that my suspicion of the idea that we didn't need to wear masks and having some N95s that were around the house because I'd had them for, workshop kind of stuff. And, there was a little bit, I live across the street in Brooklyn. I live across the street from a hospital.
Whoa.
In fact, the very hospital that was featured a lot in the Times because it had, cooling trucks outside to like put, as impromptu morgues. And it was pretty intense. And the feeling of, I felt guilty that I had N95s and that I wasn't giving them to the hospital. And in fact, did give some, but kept some. And it was a really intense feeling early on, and definitely masking and like wiping the doorknobs, as we came in and out of the house. And I was actually wearing gloves, when I needed to go on the subway, as well as an N95. I didn't know anything about an N95 not being enough, that a like true respirator might be something more than that. So I thought I was maxing out. As time has gone on, and during most of the first year of the pandemic, I ended up spending most of my time outside, away. I mean, because our apartment in Brooklyn was right across the street from, what felt like ground zero. We went upstate and spent most of that year upstate. What was I going to say? Just the feeling of anger over the politicization was something I felt pretty passionate about. But at the same time, I'm upstate in sort of 50-50 Trump country, and it was a political statement among a lot of people here not to wear a mask, and I knew I wasn't going to change their minds. So, it made it that much more important for me and my wife to wear masks when we were in any kind of proximity or went indoors, and, really watched who we, we had a couple of social, very limited social activities in our backyard, with good friends who had been tested and we had been tested, and, we were 6 feet from each other, and we were like pretty scrupulous. And now I've just come to, people's positions are what they are, and it's up to, I think it's a bad thing for anybody to get the virus, but I can't control what other people do. If I have a conversation with somebody, I'm gonna tell them, I wear a mask whenever I'm indoors, in a store, in any place where I don't absolutely know the status of the people that I'm with, and sort of, with the people I know whose statuses I know, and who I know engage in the same kind of like masking up where they're around anybody they don't know. We still keep our distance, and, anything resembling a hug is kind of like negotiated and like that. But I'm definitely less scrupulous than I was. And the other thing I was going to mention is, for whatever weird reasons, I mean, probably having to do that we've spent so much time out of the city, but neither my wife or I have ever gotten COVID that we know of. And yeah, that's an on masking, I think, for me. But the thing I am passionate about is sense making and sense doing, and that's what brings me here. And I will say that I think I've said this before, but for the different cast, I worry that this subject is almost too hairy to do sense making and sense doing on, because it has so many facets. It seems like a really tough thing to start with, but I'm game because I'm passionate about sense making and sense doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. John, I think that leaves you.
I kind of agree with Michael. That book Homo Deus. I think we just have two different species on the planet now, and it's, you know, we're not going to each species isn't going to convince the other species that they're wrong. So I don't know that there's much ground to be made on masks. Personally, I wear them in grocery stores. When I have a meeting with a group that I chair, I don't. We do ask everyone that, you know, if you're coughing, sneezing, wheezing, scratchy throat, blah, 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 go, you know, zoom in. And, you know, I bought a pod for giving them a nice experience if they're not in the room. I'm passionate about sense making because you can't do anything about anything until you've made sense of it. So I view it as a two-step process. And I think that's all I was supposed to answer, wasn't I? Yeah.
Thank you. Bentley, should we look at the spreadsheet?
Oh yeah, that would be a good probably next step, and this kind of flows on from what we're
So
discussing.
And the spreadsheet is kind of more toward what each of us who's been regulars on the call would like as outputs. It doesn't make very good use of Joanne being here. So I'm thinking maybe we hold on that for a second, because I would love maybe to ponder together. Joanne, what's in your head? Can you just evert it somehow so that we can just like pour it into spreadsheets and Miro boards and all that?
About this topic, or I wrote down, like when everybody spoke, I wrote down my thoughts, like quick little thoughts about stuff. I don't know if you want that or you want something else from me.
That's actually a great start. And Pete,
Okay.
Pete, your intuition on how this informants in insights fit into this process are welcome as well.
Okay, so I might work backwards. John, you said that you like sense making because you don't like doing something until it makes sense to you. I know a lot of people who do things, don't know why. They don't know why. It's because their priest told them, their mother told them, their husband told them, whatever. I find that most people don't do sense making in their lives.
Well, it's type 1 and type 2 thinking.
But I think I think that's in the majority. A lot of people I know, though I haven't calculated to make sure that it's the majority. The reason why I said sense making didn't work, and this is a response to something Bentley said, is that I find what makes more sense with other people is they do what changes other people's behavior or why they do stuff is peer pressure or using what other people do as a benchmark for what they're going to do. And that's why I think sense making, while it's important for policymakers to do that, that's why I told Peter, why don't you make up a policy of what you want, and then you have to advertise it or something. And examples of that are smoking, secondhand smoke, seatbelts, drunk driving. These are things that sense making, it made sense to do it. It took massive amounts of convincing the public these things. And now we've accepted it. It's fine not to smoke in front of other people. It's you have to buckle your kid in. Drunk driving is frowned upon, but there were times when none of this stuff, it took a lot of effort to get to that point. Jerry, you said something about group psychology, mandates versus encouragement. And I don't know why I wrote that. I didn't write any more thoughts. I'm sorry. So a lot of people have mentioned the next pandemic. I just want to say we're not done with this pandemic. And the reason why I say that, even though people aren't dying, well, actually people are dying. Like there's a 9/11 worth of people who are dying every week. And a lot of people, young people, all the time you hear someone 40 died of a heart attack, someone whatever has blood clots or whatever. It's still going on. And the thing I'm worried about is a lot of people think HIV happened in the 80s. HIV started, I think, in the 70s. You had a flu, not a big deal. And it was about, 5, 10, 15 years later that you came down with AIDS. SARS-CoV-2 has not been in humans that long. And we don't know, 5, 10 years. If you think about it, HPV is another thing. You catch HPV, you don't get cancer that week. might be 10 years before half the people get it. That's why we're still keeping it. We don't even fear long COVID as much as we fear it's a post-COVID, so I forget what it's called, the HPV, the AIDS kind of stuff, like, will this happen? And there's already people doing research for things like cancer, saying that breast cancer in women, COVID might make it easier for breast cancers to develop in women. That's just the beginning of the study. But there's people studying that, and we don't know. A lot of these viruses, something happens 10, 20, 30 years later, and that's what we don't want. I think so. Michael said this might not be a good topic for sense making. I think it's a perfect topic, because if you could make sense out of this thing, then you could do it out of anything. So those are my thoughts. But most of it is, oh yeah, one more thing. Joel said something about making decisions. I think a lot of people don't like making decisions. We have too many decisions to make every day. I love Trader Joe's because you go in there, there's one ketchup, one, there's few choices. And I know a lot of people who don't, the way they make decisions about a lot of things, they decorate their house, they see what their friends have there. What haircut do I want? Jennifer Aniston has a nice haircut on TV. What clothes do I wear? I saw this, people, a lot of things people do is mimicking other people. And it might be mimicking the celebrities or mimicking the kids in your class or the people next door. But I think that's how most people make decisions in their life. And so when Peter told me about this, I said, you guys I want to see this thing go from you guys talking about it to having influencing policy or influencing, because Peter, every once in a while, I say, you guys talk a lot and I don't see, you guys are not, I mentioned, what's his name? The guy in the bubble, Andy Slavitt is not smarter than you guys at all, but he got hooked up with the Obama administration and now the Biden administration. And for a guy who's not overly, not brighter than any of you guys, he has gotten to influence people just because of where he is. And it's just but to have a bunch of really smart people sitting around talking about something, it'd be nice to see it go somewhere.
Yes, and I think you're sort of connecting the dots that I was trying to connect earlier as well, which is if SenseDoing were to work well, it would turn into policy recommendations for things like, you know what, we need to get people to just model the behavior who everybody else just follows blindly. And there's an epidemic of lack of critical thinking, that you can point to the dumbing down of civilization, all those kinds of things. So I agree with your general observations that people don't sense make in their lives, or they only sense make on a particular thing that they really care about, like baseball, right? And then the rest of the world can go to hell because it's overwhelming. What difference does it make? I don't care. I'm going to die anyway. Any number of good excuses. So I'm also kind of an amateur student of people who are on the dark side of history, like Eddie Bernays, the father of public relations, who got people to buy more ivory soap by starting soap carving competitions in the Great Depression. So the people just bought bars of soap to carve them up because soap carves really easily. And then you get some judges, you get some press, everybody buys a lot more soap. Awesome. Are there other ways to make a game out of, a challenge out of, or whatever out of really good behavior that actually saves a bunch of lives? I don't care how we get people to do it, as long as we don't violate their trust, because I think that untrustworthy ways of doing this get exposed and turn into less desirable behavior down the road. And then if some batch of the population would like to actually see the statistics, the outcomes, the science of it, let's make that easier to explore. And I don't know that that's a really big sliver of humanity. I don't know that there's that many people who are like, all right, all right, I'm convinced this is important. Show me the evidence. And it's like, okay, but that should be there, and we ought to do that work as well, right? But as you said, we don't have a civilization that's answering to reason very much. My last 30 years journey started when I realized I hated the word consumer, and the consumerization of our civilization is why we are stupider as a collection than we are as humans naturally. Just my own take.
But Jerry, you kind of bit into it. You said that when the CDC said you didn't need masks anymore, you lost. I think we're in a world where the CDC doesn't care. I mean, they changed the isolation to 5 days, supposedly because Delta needed their people to come back. So the leadership's not there for it. I don't know who you'd go to, who can start, if you guys make sense of this and you decide that masks work, or for any other policy that you guys might talk about, if the CDC is not there, if the administration is not there, who do you have? And a lot, I've heard people say, well, who are against COVID, who are like, well, I'm not going to vote for Biden anymore because he, totally messed up COVID. So I'm thinking, so what? If Trump runs again, you're going to vote for Trump because you're mad at Biden, and that doesn't make it. But that's why I was asking Peter, why are you doing the sense making? The leadership's not there at the top. What's going to happen?
And I'm really interested in whether we could crowdsource some wisdom that has greater standing than organizations that are easily corrupted, like CDC was, I think, under Trump, maybe before, I don't know. But you're like, if CDC isn't accurate, then who do you trust? That's a really good question. Michael, then Bentley.
I was just going to raise the question that I was thinking about the fact that day after the Super Bowl, I was thinking about the fact that, 50 years ago, well, more than 50 years ago, 75 years ago, people played football with no pads, no helmets, no face guards, and had their teeth knocked out. And early on, I know that the people who wore such stuff were considered sissies or whatever. And now it's to the point where the armor that these guys wear is cool, in that world. And you have players who started wearing visors, over their face masks. More of them started doing it during COVID. And now they're still doing it because it's cool. And, and they've discovered side benefits to it, like they don't, other players don't know which way they're going because they can't see their eyes as well. Anyway, I mean, it's a sort of ancillary thing. And I wondered, taking that elsewhere, if, I'm sorry. And the last thing is just that whole thing. I mean, that not just the during COVID part, but just the gradual protection influenced leagues at levels where kids were playing and there was more protection for more players. I'm putting aside the fact that some people think if players didn't wear helmets in football, they wouldn't hit as hard and there wouldn't be as many injuries. But and then I was thinking about what businesses are, this is one of those things where you would think the cost benefit analysis for certain businesses would be such that they would mandate that people wear masks, or that people mask up when they're doing business with them. And the examples that can be shown now in terms of persuasiveness to the general public, if you could say, and I know this isn't true, but Walmart has mandated that all employees at Walmart always wear masks, and X other big retailer has not, and the COVID cases among that group are drastically lower, and among their things that like that, or different airlines that have different practices, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we need more. So much of this seems hypothetical and like somebody talking about one theory or another theory. I'm not being denialist about it. I'm just seeing it through other people's eyes, that there isn't, grand A/B tests that they can look at. And, I'm wondering, or just exemplars that can make something cool and accepted and normal for that business sector. End of thought.
So Joanne, Michael, if you go put your hand down if you're Joanne, thanks so much for bringing all that up. I'm gonna ask in a second on what you'd like to see, but let me give a little as an outcome of this, because you started talking about it, and I'd like to dive more into that. And that's also kind of the next kind of suggestion on the agenda is us kind of talk about what we want to do. And this is called SenseDoing because we do want some action and activity to come out of this. We were talking about whether we want to use the term artifacts, because that's the way I was thinking, but it's like, well, some of them are going to be actions and stuff like that. So I don't know, results, we're still figuring out our wording. And so just to kind of say it while I'm talking, what I was thinking of was a kind of one other fact, I guess. Yes, a lot of people, I'd say 90% is about right, of people that don't do a lot of sense making or anything like that. And we all have to judge on a moment by moment basis, how much energy am I going to put into this decision? And a lot of people are trying to survive. They don't have the time to do a deep dive of mask. So part of this process is also reducing the level of effort that it would take for them to make a better decision. And if we can reduce it to almost zero, and the source and the kind of the logic behind that, a lot of people may not need to see. They'll just do what their what their pastor or their friends are doing, or stuff like, or and their social groups. But for the people that do want to dive in and argue about having a nice place to where we can kind of speed up that and have more effective discussions and reduce the amount of effort for people to understand what's, how get a better proximity to reality. So in this case, I think it'd be nice to come out with a suggested kind of handbook of this is how we handle communicable diseases, which would, it would, I like thinking about the next pandemic, but it would apply to everything that's going on now. So then we would take where we are with COVID and plug it in this thing and say, okay, well, with the current state, we should be wearing masks in these places at these times of this quality and stuff like that. So a way to kind of help people make sense when dealing with, and mask is just a narrow part of it, of course. Yeah, so that's the outcome I would like to see, is some sort of document with all the reasons and logic on why we're making the suggestion as a group, to say, here's the decision-making process we as a community can use to decide what level of masking is appropriate for the situation. Yeah. So I'd love to hear, Joanne, if that sounds interesting, and also just anything else that you would like to see as an outcome of this, even if it's impossible. Like if we can't convince people to do things, I'd still like to kind of hear that. And we don't know how we're going to do everything, but we want to give it a try, and it may not work. But anyways, thank you.
You said you had something to...
Yeah, you're going to remember what you said.
Yeah.
I wanted to suggest, this is kind of an answer to Jerry's question, and thanks, Bentley, that having an idea of an output is really helpful. Bentley's question for Joanne is, I think, a really good one. Another thing Joanne would be really useful to this team for is some like high level, like, where should we look? What should, what's the best practices? The thing that really strikes me is experts. It's been really interesting to watch the evolution of experts and expertise and the way they're presented to the public. There are, and Joanne, kind of uniquely out of many people, can rattle off, these are the people you listen to, these are the people who you are forced to listen to by media that you should absolutely not listen to. You should say everything they say, you should take backwards, yada, yada. Joanne can just rattle those off, and that would be a great asset for us to have, I think. And actually, maybe that's what I was going to say.
And I think some notion of a directing attention is really important here. Like, hey, this set of people over here are not legitimate sources. They've proven themselves untrustworthy over time. This group over here have proven themselves quite trustworthy. Here, in fact, are some places where they made mistakes and copped to them and corrected them. Whatever else it is that causes people to understand that there's like some time period of trust earning that happened and trustworthy exchanges.
Another brilliant signal, and I think I learned this from Joanna, and I don't know how long it took her to kind of figure it out, but the people who say, I'm not an immunologist, I'm not an air quality specialist, I'm an epidemiologist. Turns out that when you're talking about even just masking, much less the larger thing, there's fluid dynamics people that are really important to listen to. There's epidemiologists who are really important to listen to, yada, yada. The ones who say, well, I'm an expert, I know a lot about COVID and I cover a lot of territory. Those are the people you want to watch out for, because when a person who's an expert on epidemiology is talking about immunology, they're making mistakes. They are bad news.
But somewhere in the crowd are a few people who are really good synthesists who have an overview over a bunch of experts on each of these things and collect up righter rather than wronger people who are in fact niche experts. I'm interested in those.
Yeah, those people really scare me. I'd be interested to hear Joanne, who are the great synthesists, and maybe there's a few.
Me too.
As an example though, I happen to know, I know a lot less from Joanne, stuff spills out of Joanne's head and I pick up some of it. But I know Lena Wynn, for instance, is a really great synthesist, and she's good at talking. She's good at presenting on air, and she's really bad to listen to. She is bad news. She will tell you things that are just 100% wrong, because, the thing that I'll have to look up her spelling. As far as we can tell right now, it's because she's gotten to the point where she's on places enough. She's basically a spokesperson for industry. When industry needs somebody to say, yeah, COVID isn't that bad, we should all get back to work, you hire her for tens of thousands of dollars.
Oof.
And apparently that revenue stream is what has made her easy to, I think that's probably her name, right? Lena Wynn?
Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, I think that's right.
She's from UCSF?
No, she's not. She used to be a long time ago. She was the Baltimore Director of Public Health or something
That's
like
her.
that. And she's on the East Coast.
Mhm.
But I noticed one of the things that when someone can synthesize or whatever the term, usually they give credit. So whenever she's like the people or someone will say, I'm a virologist, I'm an immunologist, I'm an aerosol specialist. And then when they talk about masking, they say, well, my personal thing, this is what I do. They don't say, this is what you should do. But when they talk outside of their field, they give credit. They say, so-and-so has a great study, or so-and-so just published this, or so-and-so has done this research. So that's one way you could tell. But the thing is, when we were talking about decision-making, like a lot of people, there's too many decisions, people don't want to make decisions. People, if you're listening to someone on TV or on the radio, you've already made the decision to listen to that channel. And that's the decision you made. And so you presume that the experts they put on are gonna, doctor so-and-so, they know what they're talking about. And so that's the problem I have, is people aren't gonna, most people, and I've had people ask me, how do you know on TV who to listen to and who not to? And well, the first person who ever asked me that watches Fox News. And so it's like, anything they put on is gonna be bad. But a lot of people, they just listen to their local news or whoever. I know some really bad people from San Francisco Bay Area who they were putting Dr. Monica Gandhi on because she was a local person. And she just consistently, time after time after time, she said, if you're vaccinated, you can't get Delta. She thought India wouldn't have a big thing. I mean, she repeatedly kept saying kids can't get it, and they keep putting her on to this day. NPR had her on last week. NPR had her on last week as one of 3 experts on whether or not you should mask. And so what do you do so that's what I mean. I mean, you smart people could talk about this, but if media is still putting these people on And this is who someone on the way to work or cooking dinner is going to listen to. And that's the only source of COVID or wearing masks that they're going to get. That's what they're going to do. The other thing is, Michael said something about businesses should do cost benefit. I think before masking, because it's kind of very political, some people I don't want to mask. The thing businesses should be doing is cleaning the air, filtering the air. If businesses did that, they would greatly cut down. You don't have to ask anybody to wear a mask. And studies have shown that it's doable, it's affordable. And there are studies out there that have shown that it greatly reduces transmission and it reduces absenteeism and sickness. And they would save in a lot of ways if they did that. And the one thing nobody's mentioned so far today is we've created a world right now because of COVID where the immunocompromised have to stay home. And, you know, I'm amazed that no one sued under the American Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing about, or even pregnant women, all these pro-life people. So in my mind, and I could be wrong, I think of pro-life and my freedom kind of stuff. And I'm a little, growing up Catholic, I'm a little like anti-religion, stuff like that, or anti-people forcing the religion on the thing. But, you know, you think these people would be on board that if you're around a pregnant person, you've got to wear a mask because COVID, pregnant people getting COVID, there's an increase in stillborn and some other complications. And they could test it. It's a placenta. I mean, the placenta does not look normal. The woman's gotten COVID when she's pregnant. So there's a lot of things we haven't touched on. And I think it all goes back to most people are going to do what the neighbor's doing, what everybody else in their neighborhood's doing, what people, and no one's going to do research as to whether or not the person they see on TV, the expert they see, whether they're spewing out good stuff.
Thank you. John, then Bentley, then we're probably gonna have to wrap this call because we've gone for most of our time.
I actually forgot why I raised my hand in the first place. What I just what I just heard though from Joanne was an idea that I could do for policy keys, which is workplace air filtration. So that's actionable. It's quantifiable. It can be parsed out with equal numbers of pros and cons. It can be looked at maybe in 3 different variations to compare the 3 solutions to see which one is the best. So there are 6.1 million employer firms in the United States. That's probably prohibitive right now to do air filtration for 6.1 million up, you know. Okay, so but only 1% of them, roughly speaking, employs over 100 people. So you could start there and solve 80% of the problem with very little effort. The government could give tax incentives. States could give incentives. So there's a really genuinely good idea that I find to be sense making and then sense doing. In fact, I might even punch out the puzzle this week. I do rough drafts that then can be, anyway, maybe I have to remember what I was going to say. Yeah, so why isn't there's no back button? What happened to the back button? So if you Google almost any subject, all the research is there. I mean, everybody, almost anything you can think of, it's already been done. There's not a lot of new stuff left to do anymore. So I call it scanning and sorting. It's one of the 3 ways that we humans think. So what I do with the puzzles is now I would go and try to get, I don't know, 20, 30 pros and 20, 30 cons, sort them, try to get them from sources that other people will believe, not just me. So in other words, not just all liberal sources. You know, go to good conservative sources as well. There are many out there. And then by presenting a balanced argument for and against, or I call them yeses and nos, I can get a score out of policy keys. So I found that to be very interesting. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, John. Bentley?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of challenges in getting people but there are also solutions, potential solutions. I'm gonna say solutions. There are ways to make the media to potentially improve the media environment in the future, and this, and have people influence each other, and lots of ways to influence people, but that's not really kind of the topic. Well, it is the topic of this, so that'll be part of it. But first, I think we want to say, what do we want to accomplish? Then we'll talk about how, even if it seems impossible at the moment, and parts of it will be. But it'd also be nice, and Jerry, just maybe a point of order. We increased these meetings to an hour and a half, so we do still have like 30 more minutes.
Oh, right. Sorry about that.
If people can stay, hopefully that way.
Yeah, yeah.
everyone-
I thought we'd started on the top of the hour because I was aware of the 90 minutes, but I thought we'd started earlier, but we didn't.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think it'd be good to kind of agree on what's a shared, and we can have multiple like outcomes we want for this, but what's a good one to kind of focus on?
So it might be a good moment to turn to the spreadsheet for a second, which I was going to suggest we do asynchronously, but we now have time. Partly because the spreadsheet is an attempt to clarify the outcomes or activities or artifacts. And we could add a couple lines to a couple rows to it if there are artifacts that people don't see described here that would be useful. And then I'm not clear what the protocol is, whether each of us has X number of points to award to whatever artifacts we want, or whether we just vote on the ones, or what the protocol is.
Yeah, I can talk what my initial thoughts were, and it's probably overcomplicated.
That's
as
fine.
usual for stuff
And
that I do.
I put the link in the chat. I'll repeat the link in the chat now. Go ahead.
So this is where I kind of list some things some people mentioned. And then yeah, I just thought we could like do ranked choice voting sort of thing. Except in this case, it would be the higher the number, the more important it is to you, and just get a feel for which one of these we want to focus on. Of course, we can all work on all of these.
How did you do those cool angled headers?
Yeah, that's there's a rotation. Here we go.
Really?
Technology, man.
Man, I've never seen
Amazing.
that. That is just cool.
Yeah, I did a lot because I do these number things.
Yeah.
So yeah, or we could just talk it through, right? And if people are like, oh yeah, I could go for working on that one, then yeah, this is how I kind of think things. Am I overly overly analyzed brain?
All right. I like this table a lot. Anybody want to jump in?
Trying to put my hand down.
Joanne or Pete?
And what's the before I talk about the spreadsheet, another point of order. I would love to ask Joanne for about 2 or 3 minutes about experts. I think I could give her good prompts, and she would give us just great stuff to write down, and for Jerry to brain maybe later in the call. So the spreadsheet. What are the numbers? What we would be interested in?
So the main thing on the left are like, what are some outcomes? What do we want to have come out of our time together?
Yep.
Most of these
And
are
then
artifacts.
And then the numbers.
So the numbers, which we don't have to use, the higher the number, the more important it is to you. Try not to reuse the number, and then we have a total at the end, just to
Gotcha.
just as a way to rank them if it gets complicated enough. But we could see if we even need that. So if we were doing it asynchronously, then you could kind of see what other people think about what you wrote compared to other things.
Yeah, I would do this async.
And I'm happy also doing, having just a general discussion about experts with Joanne's, doing that first and this async, whichever.
The thing that's I think is missing here is, why are we even talking about masking? Like,
Well, these would be outputs that this group could generate. So then one of these could go to a policymaker or.
But why, like the only reason to get anybody to mask is, do you care about your health? Do you want to not be sick? Do you not want like an increased chance of cancer in the future or something like HIV cropping up in your future? Do you want to not keep getting sick over and over again? Like, I don't, like, you can't.
So this group could
mean-
influence society by influencing policymakers or decision makers at companies or.
But it's kind of like a carrot and a stick. Like we were doing sticks for a while. If you don't mask, blah, blah. We have to give people carrots. We have to give them incentives to want to.
Mhm.
People are going to mask for two reasons. One of them is if everybody else is masked, they'll do it. And people have like, so that's a big thing. But the other thing is there's got to be a benefit to it. Like right now, people aren't masking and they don't think it's a problem.
I would add a third one, which I think is going to happen in 2 or 3 years. People are going to start to tally up how many of their friends and family they've lost or who are chronically ill. And that won't change it. But the thing that will change it is a little bit after that, when people start saying, you know, if you have a lot of people dying in your life, or if you have a lot of people with heart attacks in your life, probably it's the COVID. And maybe as a society, we want to change that.
People are eating crap food knowing they're going to die of a heart attack at 60. Like, you know.
Well,
That's 'cause-
Joanne, there are a lot of people influencing other people today,
Yeah.
and some of that's intentional and some of it's not. Several of us in here are working on ways to influence people.
Mhm.
So even though right now what you're saying is accurate for now, but we don't like that situation, so we're gonna
Yeah.
try to change it. So just assuming that we will apply some techniques to help people change their minds towards reality a little more. In a step to that, what things would we want to have? So like, I mean, so I mentioned, let's have a policy document where we recommend to governments and to businesses and people, just a general place to go that says, hey, based on the situation with whatever terms are going around, this is your decision matrix on when to wear a mask. Is that if we assume that we'll be able to convince people to look at that and use it, which we'll talk about later on how to convince people, would that be something useful, or is there something better we should be working on rather than that?
Filtration, air filtration, because I think there'd be more success in air filtration than in getting people to wear masks.
It's kind of like putting fluoride in the water, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So and I guess when we talk about masks, like we used masks because that's what people are arguing about right now, but it is the meta goal is what should we do as far as, because I mean we could also talk about hand washing and stuff like that. So filtration, I mean, maybe the answer to this thing is, well, we don't need a policy to wear masks because we're going to have a policy for air filtration or less masks, right? So we could change the topic to air filtration, or we could expand the topic and say masks / air filtration. That I think we're all open to that. So yeah.
So I guess the thing that comes to mind right away is I would work on masking in places where vulnerable need to be able to go. So hospitals, medical settings, pharmacies, and grocery store, public transportation. Public transportation would be top of the list. Those things. Like I'd be happy if those things, if we accepted that we have to have this, we have to make accommodations for everybody to be safe. But I don't know if that would be.
I think we can include air filtration in this whole mix, though. So I think that's really good. Also, and say also improve air filtration in those locations, right?
But I would like, I think if we were going to influence people, I think it would be to do things like you have to wear masks in public transportation, medical settings, pharmacy, and food stores. So that would
That'll
be
work in the blue states. It's not going to work in the red states.
right. Yeah.
I would like to discourage people from saying things won't work because we know it's hard. It may be impossible, but let's not give up. John, you said that, and aren't you working on ways to change that situation?
Yeah, but we try to find solutions like Joanne's. They're politically doable. And they'll solve 80% of the problem. Because then everything else becomes less important.
Yeah, and that's a great way of doing it. And at times we will also have situations where even the most, it's not like things are doable and not doable. There's a level of effort to getting it done. And there are things we can do to bring down that level of effort. But yeah, that kind of polar Boolean is not helpful to people making rational decisions. That's kind of a distraction.
Yeah, but the red states are making emotional decisions. They're not in value decisions. They're not making logical decisions.
And shouldn't we help them make logical decisions?
And they want to help us to make emotional decisions.
They're making
Yeah.
political decisions that are means emotional.
Don't we want to help make emotional decisions be the ones we want, like this is cool. Sorry to butt in, but I just wanted to throw that out.
The point is, it's not literally impossible. It's just more expensive than useful, and there may be other options. So let's not say it's impossible when it may or may not be possible, when we don't even know what all the possibilities are. So I'd just.
If I may jump in, Joanne, are you complete?
Yes. Thank you.
Cool. So a couple things. In the run up to this and previous calls here, we talked about scope creep, and I'm probably one of the guiltiest here of scope creep, because for me, this topic touches all these other topics like, well, hey, is there really even a pandemic? Is it so much worse than the flu? All those kinds of questions are outside the question of, hey, we should mask, or everybody should mask, or sometimes you should mask, or whatever. And then alternatives to masking is a side conversation, but if that's the best policy, then great. And then how do I know a place is filtered? Like, should we create citizen awards for places that filter well, or a LEED plaque that goes on the door that has to be earned and is not falsifiable, or an RFID code? Or do we get personal Geiger counters like they did in Japan after Fukushima to try to citizen map where radiation was going? Do we get, particulate matter meters that anybody could build and make and take into places, and then have an app that says, oops, you are in a place where the filtration is shitty. You should put this red warning badge on the door and you should mask up fast or something. I don't know, but I think that those things are really interesting. And then, Joanne, two things you pointed to, which is really interesting. One of them is it took forever to get seatbelts installed in cars. I used to have a 1962 Sunbeam Alpine where the seatbelts were an aftermarket thing. Somebody had put General Motors seatbelts into this little car, which in 62 didn't need to have a rear view mirror or seatbelts or headrests or anything. Never mind airbags and crushable front zone or anything like that. Never mind those things. But we did it, right? And we approached that as a public health matter, which was really interesting. And there's very interesting conversations about gun safety as a public health crisis, or other things that the war on drugs as a public health crisis instead of a criminal crisis. These are really interesting policy questions that policymakers are busy like waving hands and making shadow puppets about. And I would rather they be pointing to like some body of evidence and a grassrootsy social movement that say, hey, there's another way out of this that actually solves the problem better. So how do we get there? And then you said, and as we solve the smoking crisis, sort of largely, like public spaces are now pretty free of smoke. When I walk into a place and I smell smoke, I'm like, ugh, and my disgust like kicks in. And I grew up with two smokers. My parents were both smokers. But at the same time as we started cracking down on smoking, Nixon told Earl Butz, hey, we need cheap calories. And so part of the reason why it's cheaper to buy lots of fatty calories and we have an obesity epidemic is that there were policy decisions put in place a very long time ago in the 70s, 60s and 70s that gave us that. And that's very hard to undo because all of a sudden veggies are expensive. Like when I go to a market and I see a $5 a pound tomato, I'm like, don't tomatoes just kind of sprout anywhere? What the fuck are tomatoes doing at £5? Seriously, people? Like, what is up with this? Anyway, I get angry because it should be cheap to eat healthily. And by the way, urban gardening, there's a whole bunch of movements to actually grow your own food, which are terrific. And boy, is that ever scope creep, right? So all these things are deeply intertwined, which is why systems thinking is so fun and so hopeless, which is why sense making seems so hopeless. And I'm hoping that SenseDoing gives us some way of clarifying, hey, by the way, there's all these other issues which we could go talk about in a different discussion. How do we narrow the focus down to where we can answer a couple questions in a useful way, put out something that is useful per se, and then lather, rinse, repeat as we start to touch the neighboring issues? Because then I think that scope creep just merely means here is a path through a series of intertwined issues to explore. And if we crack the code on how to hold that conversation well, how to create a spotlight of credibility that will cast on things, how to create markers of trustworthiness on spaces for, hey, this space has great filters installed. We will vouch for that because we had 10 people who are citizen scientists with their devices walk through and like, yep, air is being filtered here all the time. This is a good to go place. You can unmask walking in here because it'll be okay. There you're nodding no, so maybe don't unmask. Anytime you're in a small space, mask up anyway. It's just improving your odds, right? So anyway, I'm interested in all those things and how they interact, partly because so many people die because of very stupid policy decisions, and then so many people die because they're not thinking. Stacy.
Towards a broader template of sense making using masking as the example, might we want to include psychological factors that would make people more likely to wear a mask, less likely to wear a mask? And then a secondary thing, other questions that would make disagreements about masking irrelevant, like filtration, like those two added things to any sense making topic.
Sounds like good ads. Michael? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to I was struck by the emotion, non-emotion question, red states, blue states, what can we do? And I'm feeling like, I keep hearkening back to Joanne's soundbite of I'm not pro-mask, I'm pro not getting COVID. And that seems like, it seems like our SenseDoing exercise wants to be around how do we reduce the number of COVID cases or COVID deaths or whatever it is, because that, if we're not writing off red states because people are resistant to mask mandates, and our point is reducing the number of COVID deaths, how do we take that into account and either change minds, change emotions, make it cool among people whom it's not cool for so they can make an emotional decision, or, mandate air filtration? They're all different things that we can do if our objective is to reduce the spread of COVID. That may be masks among some people, which is definitely good, and maybe non-mask measures among other people, and maybe, mind changing, coolness changing public campaigns. I just feel like if we focus our efforts, with blinders on masks, I'm also, this is a weird metaphor, but it always made me think about like if you're against abortion, if you want to reduce the number of abortions, you'd be pro sex education, contraception,
Living
support-
wage.
living wage. I mean, all these
Birth
other
control.
things that would reduce the, if that was our meter on abortion, we could all get behind that. Nobody's pro-abortion, they're pro-choice. Anyway, sorry to get off into that one, but
Go creep. Wah, wah, wah. I love it.
yeah, so I'm just saying.
But what you said was excellent. It's totally transferable from one, like abortion to drunk driving to, it's the same thing for all of them. It's like, what can we do to reduce
The harm.
the
Yeah.
harm? And except it's not just death, Michael. We're talking, there are people,
Long-term effects.
experts are predicting there'll be long-term and stuff we don't even know about yet. Because COVID's only a few years old.
So I remember what I was going to say before. In Vistage, we call it restatement. So the restatement, I think that I'm hearing is, how do we prepare for the next pandemic? It has nothing to do with COVID. It's what do we do the next time? So, and I Googled that, and there's, hundreds of articles, World Bank, Boston University, Scientific America, Gates Notes, American Management Association. I mean, there's quality sources. They have to be read, and we have to read and sort. I mean, we may come up with our own original ideas. It could happen. But typically, other people have already figured this out. It's just, it hasn't been sorted into one coherent article.
Thanks, John.
Yes, or just maybe not even say the next pandemic, to Joanne's point earlier, that what do we, how do we handle pandemics wisely, including, where we are in COVID, which I think is just me nitpicking. So we can expand it out of masks. My concern is that we're already talking about masks being too big of an issue. So it'd still be nice if we could find a way to narrow it down. I mean, we could talk about maybe the aerosolized or the transmission between people who aren't touching or something like that. As far as guidelines for that, would be nice. We could, but I'm fully open to just saying, let's just go down COVID and see or let's go down pandemics and see how far we get. That was the only reason why we said masks, just to kind of limit the scope a bit. But if that's not wise, we don't have to.
I just want to offer maybe a solution to what you're asking, Bentley, which is masking, and whatever we mean by masking in the middle of it, is inextricably connected to all the issues we've been bringing up, which we're sort of calling scope creep. If we just name those issues and put them over in a parking lot that we call scope creep or something like that, or just related issues, and let them sit over there comfortably and not worry about them, but not try to solve those, and just come back and keep coming back and focusing on the masking thing until we're happy with this piece, that works for me really well. And the fact that these things would be named and put someplace lets my mind go, yep, that's connected and related. And we could even have a couple sentences that briefly say, hey, businesses should be focused on air filtration. There's a really juicy, lovely topic over here. Here's best of that we know about that. But hey, go back to the masking conversation, because that's what we're talking about here. That works. Michael?
I want to push back on that a little bit, just because in a way, I think it lets us be, I know it sounds like it's broadening, but it's simpler to depoliticize, to say, hey, this is our objective. And we get in all these fights about like masks versus not masks, and people having COVID parties because it was going to make them immune, and all these like crazy things, and people not knowing about potential long-term effects. And so let's not tackle all that, but look at, objectively, masks, air filtration, the different things that can be done, and maybe discover that, hey, it's a better way to reduce, it's a better way to reduce the effects of COVID, to totally concentrate on air filtration and forget about the contentious issue of masks. I'm not saying that's true, but but have that kind of like goal orientation instead of making it all about one of the possible ways of tackling this issue that kind of brushes the others off to the side. I think it just,
Can I ask a clarifying question? I think you're proposing the utilitarian objective function of how do we reduce COVID harms, which means deaths plus long-term COVID bad outcomes, as opposed to the current framing question of what would a wise society do about masking. Is that correct? Is that the binary you're presenting? Okay, and I'll speak to that when it's my turn. Joanne, it's up to you.
So one thing I've noticed is I don't think today anyone's talked about the fact that individual responsibility versus community responsibility, which is something
Stacey actually mentioned in chat.
she did. Okay, I wasn't reading the chat. So I think that's a huge thing. I think pandemics are a community problem and they require community solutions. And the reason why people like Peter and me mask all the time, even with relatives who look safe and healthy, is because SARS-CoV-2 can be spread without anybody having symptoms. And mask is our last defense. We decided we don't want this. And the only thing we could do if we don't want it, it's kind of like if you don't want heart disease, keep your cholesterol, don't eat crap food. Like you could do that. You could eat just a really, super healthy diet and you reduce your chance of heart disease. But the only thing we could do is wear a mask. And I think that what you guys are talking about, you're not talking about how do we get individuals to do individual stuff. You want community. And so it's a community problem. It needs community-based solutions. And right now, if you don't have the willingness for a lot of people to be wearing masks, until we get that done, I think the whole filtration thing, if we could get the filtration thing going, that would really help. And there are examples like in schools and all that, where they made it a project for kids to do it. They've, I could send you through Peter a thread, this really cool thread about a school that did it.
I think that's the one I posted in chat.
Yeah.
Good.
But yeah,
Briefly,
the thing is to keep people healthy.
cool, thank you. Briefly, I may be wrong about what I'm about to say, but the reason I had proposed what would a wise society do about this topic, and the reason that I kind of like, I itch when I hear the objective, how do we reduce harms question, is that the former question puts me in a citizen mindset of what's good, and the wisdom quest for how do we do this well together. And the second question puts me in an objectivist scientist frame of mind for like, hey, how do we measure harms and how do we do the most good for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? Which is like the simple mathematics of reducing harm. And I don't like that framing as much as I like the community and wisdom framing. And I could be entirely wrong about this, because the more scientific framing seems more verifiable, lockdownable, I don't know, something like that. But I like the squishier frame because it's warmer for me. That's all.
I don't disagree with that, actually. I mean, and I don't see it as like what I was pitching as being scientific necessarily, because it seems like it would include, hey, these people are emotionally responding, and therefore, as a wise society, how do we deal with that, and how do we like make it cool for them, make it not an emotional trigger for them, enroll them. So I don't disagree. I think that you were sort of addressing my point. So
Thanks, Michael. And to me, the subjective harms question is a subset of what a wise society would do. It would be like, one of the things we would do is figure out subjectively what is the path that reduces harms, and so it's subordinate to the broader issue of how do we work together for collective wisdom to resolve this issue together.
So we're pretty much.
also sorry. Well, I just wanted to question, is what would a wiser society do making it, what would a society that doesn't include those dummies who are making those stupid and emotional decisions?
No, not at all.
You know, I mean, so if it's what we're, if it's for our society, then I do think we have to, I mean, I don't think we really disagree. Okay.
Same here. Just to clarify, I think that our current society is messed up in countless ways and really jammed up politically and socially in ways that we need to actually tackle and kind of undo or resolve in some ways so that we can make better, wiser collective decisions about these kinds of issues. So I think that's how these things are really intertwined. Bentley, the floor is yours. We've run a little bit over time.
Yeah, so we're out of time. I want to encourage people to maybe talk about in the Slack channel, or we're not using Slack, in the Mattermost channel, post kind of different phrasings of what how you'd want to phrase, our kind of question that we're dealing with, if since we kind of want to expand it a bit. And then also post goals that you want to do. And to Joanne's point about the what individual versus group, I think that's a discussion that we'll have. I just want to kind of figure out, first let's kind of agree on what we want our outcome to be, and then we'll get into that.
Does everybody like or not like the spreadsheet with the different artifacts? I like it partly because I think we should discuss what we're aiming toward. And then I proposed briefly to Bentley earlier in a side conversation, what we could do is pick our top 3 favorite artifact outcomes and just shift focus from one week to the next. Like this week, we're only going to aim for this artifact together. And we're going to give up our own desires for other artifacts, and we're going to see how far we get on this particular artifact. Next week, we'll focus on this other artifact, and then we can compare notes and see how those things went. That would work really, really brilliantly for me. I don't know if it works for anybody else.
Yeah, and in the discussion, I would like to kind of decide as a group whether we're going to include it to everything about COVID or just keep it with the masks and air quality, or that communicable part as opposed to everything else. So let's continue those and in next week's meeting.
Sweet. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everyone.
Don't catch COVID.
You mean wear a respirator?